All right, guys, we're going to talk a little bit about the NAR settlement of 2024 that pretty much impacted our industry and how we do business. Um, Concerning expectations and compensation, there are some things that we need to discuss and we need to implement. So let's walk through. I created a flow chart to make it easier for us to work together on this. So let me share this flow chart, and I'm also going to have a copy of it in the description. So there'll be a link for you to download it. Okay, so are you working on the buyer side of the transaction? If so, you'll come down here. If you're working and representing the seller, you'll follow this side. So let's go through it as if we're working with a buyer. You have to, in order to show properties, you have to have a buyer representation agreement signed. There are two versions of this agreement, a short form and a long form. I'm recommending, and what we use is the long form. That's the 1501. So let's pull this up and let's look up at the long form. Basically, it just is pretty clear. There's no ambiguity. So it's better, in my opinion, that you use the long form. That way there's no confusion. Everybody knows what's expected in terms of the compensation, because that's the big thing. So are you going to put, if you put 0% on here, guys, like telling your buyer they don't have to pay you anything, then you won't make any money. You basically have to present yourself and the services you provide up front, and you have to let the buyer know how much that's going to cost them. So regardless of if the seller is giving compensation or concession to go towards that expense or not, that's what they're going to owe. So there's two things. It's in here. It's also in the contract, and we'll go over that. But even prior to the NAR ruling, we always worked with clients and said, hey, this is what we charge. And before showing a house, if we found out that the seller only was paying, let's say 2%, and we charge 3%, we let our buyers know up front, like, hey, we've talked to the lender. This is what you're going to need for down payment and closing costs. For this particular house, it's going to cost you an additional, let's say 1% of 500,000, right? So it's going to cost you, and when I'm on the spot, I want to make sure my numbers are accurate. So 500,000 times 0.01. Whoops. So 5,000 bucks. So if you want to see this house on top of your closing costs, on top of your down payment that you've already gone over with the lender, you're going to have to bring an additional $5,000. Are you okay with seeing this house? Does it make sense for you to do that? So we did this even prior to the NAR settlement. Just having the conversation, knowing what to have in terms of what you offer. So your drive time, your showing time, the time you spend negotiating, the time you spend preparing, looking at numbers, researching the area, being there for the inspection, going over the report, finding out the things that make sense to have to be done, getting together a price list so that they know, okay, if we go with this house, these are the things that need to be done. They're not deal breakers. I've helped you do some research, giving them your allied resources. So people that do a good job in terms of lending that can save them money. Just the time that you present, your experience, the resources, what is that worth to you? And are you able to present that to the buyers concerning this compensation piece? Okay, so you will have to have either the short form or the long form filled out, signed before you can show properties. Okay, that's number one. As I mentioned, if you have 0 on your compensation, you're not going to get paid anything. So next, is the seller offering to pay and offering some compensation towards your cost? If yes, then you want to put that on the 1-to-4 contract. Okay, if you're representing the buyer, you really don't have all the power here. The listing agent is representing the seller, and they could force you to say, hey, if you want this house, we're not doing it on the contract, put it on the 2402, right? So there is an addendum that you can use that talks about the compensation. So let's look at the 1-to-4, page 6, and then let's also look at where else you have to add it. So if you're in Texas, I have Texas forms. I'm a Texas agent. You can probably follow along and apply the things that we're doing to your contracts. If you're in another country and this hasn't hit you that yet, it may. Like I said, prior to this NAR settlement, I was already doing business like this. I was already talking about what I provide and what my compensation is, and if the seller wasn't contributing towards that, how much it would cost the buyer. So I would recommend that you implement something like this in your business, whether or not you have these laws in your country, or if you're in a different state, just follow through and see how you can apply these things. So if we look at the 1-to-4, we go pretty much everything is the same. I mean, there have been some changes, but on page 6, if you go down to settlement and other expenses, okay, this section here, 1B, the following amount to be applied to brokerage fees that buyer has agreed to pay. And it can be either a flat fee or a percentage. So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you want it to be, because all parties will have signed this documentation. So it's more powerful here than on an addendum. So I would recommend that you placing it here. And then if you go down to page 10, placing it here. Okay, so if you put it in, you need to add it here as well. So pursuant to previous separate agreement, listing broker has agreed to pay other broker a fee of disclosure is for informational purposes and does not change the previous agreement between brokers to pay or share a commission. Okay, now if the listing agent says no, we want it to be on this 2402 compensation agreement between brokers. And if you go on here and you fill out this information, so here's the listing broker, here's the cooperating broker, here's the property information, client's information, your term, right? And they may require, listing agents may say, hey, I need to see your buyer's rep, right? Like builders are doing. So be prepared to have your stuff together. Here's the fees that they're agreeing to pay, right? It says it's earned and payable. And this is the reason that I say I would recommend you putting it on the contract, because the seller doesn't have to sign this. So this is just an agreement between you and the other broker. And the having it on the contract where all parties have agreed, all parties have signed, is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. So let's go back to our compensation flow chart. So we get past this part, and the next thing is, if you ever need to amend your buyer rep agreement, you would complete the amendment 1505. So if we go here, this is where you can change or make adjustments to fees. Okay. Now, if you are on the other side of things and you're representing the seller, you're going to use your standard listing agreement paperwork. So for Texas, it's the form 1101. You go here and pull this up. Everything is pretty much the same here. like it is, but we do have a new section like it has always been, right? We do have this new section that has been added, and basically they're just saying like there is no standard commission. Brokers independently determine their fees. You're not obligated to pay any standard fee. So they have to agree. So if they are going to give you permission to say, yeah, I do want to compensate the other broker that brings a buyer, you would put that right here in section 5A1. 5A1A. Okay. So that could be a percentage or a flat fee. If the other broker procures the buyer that purchased the property, seller authorizes broker to pay, and broker will pay the, so either it's going to the compensation to the other broker working with the buyer here. And if the other broker procures a buyer that purchased the property, seller authorizes broker to pay, and broker will pay the other broker the following amount. Okay. So the thing about this, like I've had deals in the past where I charge, let's say 6%, and then I was able to negotiate to pay another agent, let's say 1%, right? Which means I keep 5, I pay out 1. On this, can't do that anymore. So broker's fee when earned and payable, seller will pay broker this percentage of the sales price. Where is it? See, okay, so without compensation for other broker. So this doesn't include, this is your, what you do, the marketing that you do, the negotiations that you do, your costs for your time to stage, whatever it is, your pricing, your research, doing the CMA, marketing it internationally, reverse prospecting, all the things that you do as a listing agent. This is what you're going to earn. This does not include the compensation for the other broker. And it states that you will refund if you don't pay the other broker. Okay. So if broker does not pay the other broker that procures a buyer as specified in paragraph 5A2, broker's fee in this paragraph 5A1 will be reduced by the amount not paid to the other broker. Okay. So let's go back to our flow chart. So you've got to have the conversations up front, talk, ask and see if they're going to offer compensation. If they are, after you sign your listing agreement, if they do want to offer compensation, you need to let the buyer's agent know to put it on that contract like we talked about over here. So page 6, section 12A, and then add it to the bottom of page 10. If they don't want to offer compensation, then you want to ask them if they're willing to consider contributing an amount towards the buyer's expenses. Because remember, not only do they have to pay your fee, they have their closing costs and their down payment. So is the seller willing to give them a concession for any of that? If they are, then you need to complete form 1412. So let's go here. Remember, these are Texas forms. So if you're in another state or country, find your disclosure that talks about contributing to the seller contributing towards buyer closing costs. So seller authorizes broker to disclose to other brokers and prospective buyers that seller will consider contributing an amount up to. So how much are they willing to contribute? Okay, you're going to have your seller tell you, you'll fill that in, and then you guys will sign. All right. If they're not willing to offer compensation, they're not willing to contribute anything towards the buyer's expenses, then you'll just negotiate offers here, right? So that's what you do. If they are willing, then like I said, you're going to go to have the other agent fill in on the contract, and that's where you guys will be negotiating. If you do need to amend your listing agreement for any reason, you will do form 1404, amendment to your listing, which is this one here. And any adjustments regarding broker's fee can be done here. All right, guys, let's take this seriously, because the market has changed and we do have to be able to provide value, and we do have to be able to articulate our worth and what we actually do. So I hope this helps, and let's keep moving.